Well, I thought I'd talk a little bit about worldviews today, but before I do that, I'd like to share a little bit of a personal story. When I was at school and about you and Barrow's age, I got interested in flying, both model planes and the real ones, and I decided to take flying lessons because at that time I wanted to become a pilot. And the lounge coffee table was a mess in the evenings with bits of balsa wood and plans strewn over the lounge floor while I was trying to build my next model. But if my skills at flying the models were anything to go by, it's probably just as well that I didn't become a real pilot, because several of my models either ended up high in trees, lost, or half buried themselves into the ground as they came in at 100 kilometres an hour. And the engines of these models, they did over 10,000 revolutions per minute. And sometimes, if I didn't have the mixture, the fuel mixture right, they would prematurely fire. So before I got my finger out of the way when I flicked the propeller, I'd have about 3 or 4 parallel cuts. Still, I had a lot of fun, and it was a real thrill to see these planes fly, even if some of them only lasted a few seconds. And I used to finance flying the real planes by working for a painter on Saturdays. So I'd be helping him paint the interior of houses, and every 2 weeks that meant enough money to go flying for an hour. So that was great. One of the first things I learned when taking to the air was the extreme importance of always having the horizon as my reference point. This was vital, because if I lost sight of it by flying into cloud, or by going into a nosedive, or pulling the stick back too far, I wouldn't be able to see which way I was going. And there have been lots of light aircraft crashes because of pilots getting disoriented. And for the same reason, flying into cloud was a no-no, because instrument training is far more advanced. And I also had to maintain the right airspeed. Too slow and I would stall and fall out of the sky. Too fast and I'd end up in a dive. When I finally took to the air on my own, I also had to maintain a safe altitude, so that if I inadvertently lost airspeed, stalled the plane and started falling out of the sky, I would immediately do the right thing to recover. And that was something I had to spend hours training on, how to recover from stalling without losing too much altitude. And then came practicing takeoffs and landings, and all the time using the horizon as a reference point. It sounds complicated, but it isn't really. And once I'd learned how to do turns, stalls, climbing and descending and landings, and once I could land without bunny hopping my way along the runway, I was let loose on the air, and that was a great step. And just like I used the horizon as my reference point, we as Christians need our reference point too. Today there are many different reference points to live by. And though another name for those reference points might be worldviews. and some have rules or philosophies that are similar to Christianity, and some are totally opposite, and some partly for and partly against. And I think it's important to know about some of these false reference points, otherwise we end up flying into spiritual cloud and become disoriented. And that can even happen if you think, wow, I'm a great Christian, this will never happen to me. The pilots on the Air New Zealand DC-10 that crashed on Mount Erebus in Antarctica in 1979 were, of course, highly trained, and they knew all about flying, but somehow they lost sight of the horizon, and that was a contributing factor to the crash and the resulting loss of lives. And we live in a so-called modern society which has become secular. In other words, more and more people don't believe in God than ever before in recent history. And we have what is known as secular humanism in our society. And those people say that there is no God, and that we as humans can work everything out for ourselves. And when you die, that's it, there's nothing more. And that's one of the horizons in today's world, and it's a false horizon. As Christians in our predominantly humanistic, secular humanistic society, we are tolerated so long as we keep our beliefs to ourselves. But Alice's reading from Matthew, what does that tell us? It says that we are to go out and make disciples. And in my opinion, in order to be effective as Christians today, I think it's useful to know how we in the Western world got into this rather messy situation with secular humanism. Where did the modern way of thinking or false horizon come from? How did the world, how has our society got itself into flying into this mess? And I'll try to explain. For a long time in the medieval church, in Europe, people used to think that all of life and all of creation under the direct supervision of God, whose intentions towards humans are perfect, and that God is infinite. And we, of course, believe that, and this was accepted without question for about 1,000 years, from about 1400 or 1500 AD. But since that time, the ideas of ancient Greek philosophers like Plato and Aristotle became known to scholars in Europe, and that was about 700 years ago. And those philosophies formed the foundation of what later became modern science. Universities sprang up and scientific laws were discovered. The way in which some of the natural, and I'm sorry, I can't even read my own writing here. Someone got a pair of reading glasses I can borrow? Thank you. Okay, the way in which the natural world works became better and better understood as scientific discoveries were made. And gradually, people in the Western world started to question God, and they started to think that the physical world and the way in which it works isn't governed by God, but we know that God is in control of everything. And this period of scientific discovery, hand in hand with that, went some political upheavals, starting with the French Revolution and the birth of modern countries. And the French Revolution came about because it rejected the Roman Catholic Church and the Pope's rule of Europe, and it broke away, and other parts of Europe started to follow suit, which led to the formation of countries like Germany and Holland. And at the same time, more and more things are being discovered about our natural world. Causes of natural events could be understood by physics rather than being caused by God in the background. The world came to be understood as running to natural laws. It was all predictable. We can understand the physical world in terms of reason, maths and science. And this promised a domination of nature, that we could control all things in the world and therefore free humans from poverty, want and arbitrary natural disasters. And it's true that there are many blessings to us as a result of modern advances in technology. Don't get me wrong, I've got nothing against science and scientific discovery. And I mean, we only have to look at our own life expectancy as human beings. Our life expectancy in the last few hundred years has more than doubled, to the extent that it is about 80. We have medical intervention when we get sick or break a bone, and we've got all sorts of technology, other technology like cell phones. How many of us walked to church this morning or came by horse and cart? Not many. We all came by cars, or most of us did anyway. And the truth claims of science are often taken more seriously than the truth claims of religion or the arts. Scientific facts and truth in the secular world have become recognised as the only objective or real truth. When science speaks, people listen and believe. And more discoveries continue to be made, with the result that religion is being pushed further and further into the background. And in many parts of our society, religion has become a relic, only to be practiced in private life. Ongoing progress seems inevitable. And we should note that this fading away of God in the background is not necessarily due to people's deliberate decisions. It's kind of a gradual process, because science, it seems, can explain more and more things, and God fades away from everyday life. And religion is seen by many as being based on blind faith, and is therefore regarded as being irrational. Appeals to God or the supernatural are dismissed as being superstitious, or at least out of bounds for proper discussion. It simply isn't cricket to discuss religion in secular society. And going back to my flying story, it thus seems that the world is in spiritual cloud and has become disoriented, even though the secular world would argue that it is still flying safely. For example, if we think of biological evolution, it's widely accepted as a fact in terms of teaching us that we as human beings are random products of chance with no purpose and no direction. And if this was true, everything that is good for us can only be obtained in this life. Therefore, we should aim to live in comfort and have lots of material possessions. And this is what advertising and consumerism are trying to tell us. So belief in evolution and that we are random products and that we're part of a random process doesn't give us any incentive to live as people of integrity. It doesn't give us any horizon to live by. And it removes the need for God, because we think that we are in control of our own destinies. And even though we are Christians, we are tainted. We are in danger of being contaminated by that sort of thinking. Yet, despite the great things that the modern world and science have promised, we've had 2 world wars. We have a form of capitalism that causes division, inequality and widespread poverty. And even among some of the secular humanists, there is some disillusionment with what is happening. Although the Western world has by and large rejected Christianity, it seems to me that there is a recognition that something is wrong, but people can't put their finger on it. Some people are losing their faith in the ability of science and the human intellect to solve all the answers to our problems. And this rejection of those values, some of you may have heard the term postmodernism, but I won't get into jargon any further. But anyway, some are doubting whether continued technological advances and living in comfort and having everything will continue to lead to progress. Have we been led astray? One commentator said about Western society that scientific rationality has given us artificial abstractions and plenty of material things, but also psychological, social and spiritual poverty. In other words, we may have lots of things materially, we may seem well off, we're all warm, we have plenty of food, nice houses, but there's something missing. In the Gospel reading from Matthew, we are told to make disciples of all nations, and we must do this to give people hope and certainty of salvation, to help them become psychologically, spiritually and socially rich again. Each one of us are like flight instructors, teaching student pilots to keep their eyes on the horizon. And as Western society flies along in its plane, the pilot knows that something is wrong, but maybe won't accept or has forgotten that faith in Jesus Christ is the only way to stop a catastrophe from coming. The pilot might realise that the secular world has lost sight of the horizon and realise in a horror that it's flying in a whiteout and become disoriented, and might believe that the plane is turning, whereas in fact it is in a steep dive. Without the horizon, there's no way of being sure, but nonetheless, the pilot pulls the stick this way and that, and it's a little bit like trying to find the answers in New Age spirituality, astrology, the occult, secular humanism, and anything that isn't Christian based. And then they're in trouble. And if this was a real plane, the disoriented pilot wouldn't have known what had happened. He would have been killed instantly as he nosedived into the ground or hit a mountain. And this is also why we need to be prepared to give to everyone who asks the reason for the hope that lies within us, hope in Jesus Christ. But as Lexia read out, we are to do this sensitively, with gentleness and respect, as stated in that first reading. And I believe that this has obvious relevance in the healing festival at Shantytown, where Joe is going to lead a team next weekend. So what I've tried to do is explain that the Lord Jesus Christ is our reference point, who is our horizon for our spiritual flight. Our reference point keeps us safe in the arms of the Lord, keeping sight of what is right, so that when we land at our destination, that destination is heaven, and that we don't get sucked in by the false horizons that I spoke of. We need to understand that as Christians we can become tempted to adopt the ways of the world without being aware of it, or else we end up not knowing how to get out of it, and that's like losing the horizon. So to what extent is our Lord Jesus the reference point in your life? To what extent is the world and all its temptations? What is it that motivates each of us here? Is it material comfort? Is it instant gratification? Or is it Jesus Christ? Or is it a mixture of the two? If you're not sure, or are aware that you have lost your way, take the time to talk to Tim, Joe, or someone on the prayer team over here afterwards. And another way of looking at it is that we as Christians are called to show the world where the true horizon is. Jesus Christ, the one who saves. That's what the gospel reading was all about. We are commanded, each of us as Christians, to help implement the Great Commission. Spiritual flight instructors. And that's especially relevant for next weekend at Shantytown, where Joe will be leading the team who will offer hope to those who are lost and who are looking for alternative spiritualities. And I would encourage you to commit yourself either to praying for the team who will be going out, or if you can't make it, praying for Joe as he and others as they attend the Health and Healing Festival. And this is an opportunity for us to show where the true spiritual